Jedi Outcast, as well as its sequel, Jedi Academy, are widely regarded as having some of the best lightsaber combat out of all the Star Wars games to date. Because of its beloved status among the Star Wars community, I've had it on my backlog of games to play for quite some time now, so how does it hold up to the hype? Pretty well, honestly. It has its problems, but if you can get past them, it's a very enjoyable game. Let's get right into it. Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast is a first and third person action adventure game developed by Raven Software and built on the Quake 3 engine. It was released way back in 2002, so if you've ever played a game from this era, you'll see a lot of common design features like having the ability to carry a whole arsenal of guns on you at a time, never having to reload, and having to collect health and shield pickups to maintain your health pool, to name a few. The game takes place 8 years after the Battle of Endor in the time of the New Republic. You play as Kyle Katarn, who, after the events of the last games, Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 and Jedi Knight Mysteries of the Sith, has severed his connection to the Force and taken up the life of a mercenary. Although this doesn't last long, as a new threat to the galaxy quickly forces him to re-establish his connection to the Force. The game has you shooting and slashing your way through large levels which are open but ultimately linear. As you progress through the game, you gain new force powers and unlock upgrades to your existing abilities. Combat and exploration are the main focuses of the game, but it has a decent story that takes you through a wide variety of locales and even reunites you with some classic characters. For an early 2000s shooter game, I felt that Kyle Katarn was a surprisingly good protagonist. Maybe I'm just a dumb zoomer, but I typically associate FPS games from this era with mute protagonists that simply will their way through every situation with grunts, testosterone, and bullet. It's nice to have your character say things and express their own motivations in between the frenzy of shooty, stabby. Kyle Katarn isn't your typical Jedi. He's a mercenary. He's gruff and rough and doesn't hesitate to stray into what those prudish Jedi would call the dark side. It's refreshing to be able to play a character which doesn't fall as clearly into the Jedi-Sith dichotomy and provides a good excuse to be able to use both light and dark side force abilities. This section of the video will have spoilers, but honestly, do you care at this point? The game is nearly 20 years old. Darth Vader is Luke's dad, and Palpatine was the Sith Lord the whole time. Big whoop, let's fucking go. The game starts off with you, Kyle Katarn, and Jan Ors, his partner in crime, being briefed by Mon Mothma on your next mission to investigate an Imperial remnant base. Pretty normal shit, except this time because the Imperials are using one of those shitty free browser VPNs and not NordVPN. Some of their data was leaked to the New Republic, revealing that they were talking about Reborn and the Valley of the Jedi, the latter of which being a big plot point in the previous games. So Mon Mothman thinks this is pretty sus. Kyle and Jan infiltrate the base and discover that there are crystals here that the Remnant were trying to use to give people force powers, but Mon Mothma says that this is impossible, so don't worry, I'm sure that this is not going to happen at all. Next, she sends you to a remote mining facility whose inhabitants have all been captured for force experimentation. You sneak in and free the prisoners, but a fallen Jedi called Desan, and his Mad Max looking underling Tavian have captured Jan, and since Kyle gave up his force powers, he can't hope to save her, and you get thrown around and teabagged. And then they kill Jan off screen, so she's definitely dead 100%. Kyle is understandably mad, so he goes to the Valley of the Jedi, which is like a Force Nexus wellspring thing. You get raptured and reconnect to the Force. But Desan followed him, and now he's going to use the Valley to create an army of evil Force crackheads. I guess the Valley just hands out Force powers to anybody that enters it? What, there are no magical trials or anything? Okay, well, it's not the most ridiculous thing in Star Wars, so let's move on. Next, Kyle goes to the Jedi Academy on Yavin to demand his lightsaber back from Luke. He agrees to let you have it again if you pass some basic trials to retrieve it from the training grounds, just so he can trust you not to cut off your own hand with it or something. This serves as your basic tutorial for using the force powers and the lightsaber. After you complete the lightsaber tutorial, it is finally time for the real game to begin, the part we've all been waiting for. Up until now, you've just been blasting your way through stormtroopers with regular guns, but now you're about to be let loose with a lightsaber. Psych! You want to use that cool lightsaber you just got and your force abilities to mow through enemies? Well, too bad. Now you're going to Nar Shaddaa, the worst level in the game, where you have to be extremely slow and methodical because there are snipers everywhere, as well as dudes dropping grenades onto you constantly. And this all takes place on extremely tight catwalks, so have fun dodging and falling to your death a million times. Seriously, after playing this level, I understand what it's like to be an NPC in Sniper Elite. These guys will instantly hit you for a decent chunk of health as soon as you put your toe into their sightline. This level made me put down the game for a solid 5 months while I worked on other reviews for the channel. Seriously, I started this review at the same time I started working on my very first video, which was my review for Euro Truck Simulator 2. So once you muster the sanity to complete this level, you eventually find Lando, who tells you that he was imprisoned by the same crime lord you were sent here to find, and get Dasan's whereabouts from. How convenient! You free Lando and head off to Bespin, where the game really opens up and becomes so much more enjoyable. You get your first lightsaber fights with the Reborn, and you get to explore a level which is much more open, expansive, and well designed than the others. You finally get to put your lightsaber to great use both in the wide avenues of the city and the tighter corridors of its buildings, slashing and dicing stormtroopers while getting into frantic lightsaber combat with the Reborn. At the end of the level, you encounter Tavian. Like a classic evil villain, she taunts you by revealing that Dasan tracked you to the Valley of the Jedi and is creating an army of Force wielders with it. After successfully revealing half the plan, she then goes on to lose to you because you are the protagonist and you can endlessly save and reload until you win. Kyle kinda goes dark side, almost kills her, but she reveals that Jan isn't dead, huge surprise, and he grants her mercy. Big mistake, Kyle. You should never let a dark side user go. Those dudes are hard to kill. You never know when they're gonna come back to ruin your day. Zombieland rule number 2, man, double tap. From here on, the story takes a bit of a backseat to that sweet stormtrooper killing gameplay, which is perfectly fine because by this point, most of your force powers are starting to become fully unlocked and Kyle is reaching his final form, so tons of combat is exactly what the game needs. You travel to an installation in an asteroid belt, and while there you run into Luke. He tells you that Dasan has used the Valley of the Jedi to create a horde of Force users, which shouldn't be a surprise considering we've been running into them for the past few missions, and that he plans to attack the Jedi Academy. You board Dasan's flagship, the Doomgiver, save Jan, send a message to Rogue Squadron to attack the ship, disable the shields, kill this discount Space Marine in a great boss fight, and escape the ship in an escape pod before it blows up. Jedi shit. Speaking of that boss fight, it's definitely the most unique in the game, requiring you to use both your guns and lightsaber in combination with excellent positioning to overcome his shield and devastating long-range attacks. Speaking of devastating attacks, if you've liked the video so far, be sure to force push that like button or the subscribe button if you want to be telepathically notified about future videos. However, there are still enough Reborn and Remnant forces landing on Yavin 4 to pose a threat to the Jedi Academy, so you head out through the jungle to defend it. Fighting your way through the swamps can be somewhat annoying, especially with the enemies that hide in the water, but it's not too difficult. Eventually you get to drive an AT-ST as well, which I am sure at the time was pretty pog mate, but nowadays serves as a perfect example of poor camera angle work. You literally can't shoot enemies directly in front of the damn walker because the walker itself blocks the camera. And you can't move the camera to the left or anything. You can move it down, but it doesn't really work if you want to shoot somebody directly in front of you at a certain angle. It's fun, but a little bit annoying. You eventually make it to the temple, and with the help of the rest of the Jedi, you clean up the invading Darkseid cosplayers. Luke is nowhere to be seen during this crucial battle, by the way. After defeating Dasan's forces, you follow him into the training area, where he does some horror movie, funhouse type shit, messing with your mind, and playing with some traps, but it doesn't really do anything, and you eventually confront him. The boss fight is pretty hard. In the game, there's this mechanic where if you jump on an enemy's head, you can knock them down, and throughout the game, this is a pretty powerful tool to use on Force wielders to basically break their guard and get a hit in. But this is one of those times where a game turns one of its mechanics that the player was using on its AI enemies back on the player and shows you just how annoying it is to those poor NPCs you constantly abuse with it. Dasan knocked me down so many fucking times while I was fighting him, somehow managing to Mario stomp me in seemingly impossible or ridiculous ways. I was literally getting styled on by an NPC, and looking back on it, I'm not salty, it was just pretty hilarious. After you eventually defeat Dasan, Dad comes back from getting the cigarettes and says you did a great job and are welcome back at the Academy if you want. Kyle gives an answer that is ambiguous enough to leave fans guessing at what's going to happen in the sequel, and then the game ends happily ever after. I give this story 5 Dasans out of 9 Dasanis. It wasn't super, but you could definitely have a worse story. My first major issue with the game, which as I mentioned before made it really hard for me to get into, was the pacing. The first, say, 4 hours of the game, you don't have access to your lightsaber or force abilities, and it's a bit of a chore to get through. The first-person shooting combat isn't bad, but it's not this game's strong suit either. Enemies will run around randomly like headless chickens, and considering the weapons in this game are pretty much all projectile-based with really slow travel times, this can make taking down these cheap grunts really annoying. You literally need to lead your targets by a few meters even when they are super close to you. And on top of that, as I mentioned before, even after you get your lightsaber, you're blue-balled and forced to play the Nar Shaddaa sniper level, where it's basically useless and you have to keep playing slow and methodical. This program is really compounded by the difficulty being all over the place. I started on the hardest difficulty, and eventually I just restarted the game and put it on the second highest because I just wasn't having fun. If I wanted to, I could have just quick saved after every fight and eventually made it through, but that just felt tedious. The main issue is that at the start of the game, you don't have your lightsaber to block damage or your force heal to give you free healing, and health packs are way too scarce to ever really feel too comfortable with the amount of health that you have. The checkpoint system is also not great, sometimes being non-existent, so make sure to get into the habit of quick saving every few minutes so that you don't lose like 10 minutes of progress and have to completely restart a level from the beginning. Now, as I've said before, once you get past those first 3 to 5 hours, the game becomes really fun. But for a lot of players, including myself, the starting experience really discouraged me from picking the game back up again. Another issue with the game is that sometimes the level design makes it really hard to tell where you need to go or what you need to do in a level. While it's good to not have objective markers pointing to literally everything, there were at least 3 or 4 points throughout the game where I spent 20 minutes or more just wandering around the level trying to figure out where I need to go. The objectives in the menu are generally pretty vague, and there's no in-game map to help you figure out where things are, which I would be totally fine with if these issues with the level design didn't exist. On top of this, buttons and other things that you need to interact with in the environment often don't stand out that well from background textures such as, like the rest of a computer console, so they can be really easy to miss and have you wandering around to try to figure out what to do. One particularly annoying example was when you're trying to free Lando's ship on Nar Shaddaa. There are these multiple unclear paths that you have to take here, but one of the worst is that you have to go through these obscure grates in the hangar to reach one of your objectives. They just don't stick out from a distance and are even covered with boxes and shit you have to destroy. Another example, near the end of the game, there are these 3 branching paths and one is covered with fire. The way you solve this is by hitting a pipe in the ceiling that sprays water down on the fire. But this pipe, it doesn't even look like a pipe, it's textured like the stone and clay of the surrounding walls and honestly just passes for some structural element. I don't know how the fuck they expect people to figure this out without literally throwing their lightsaber at everything in here until they get lucky. I just can't see anyone doing a first playthrough in the modern day without using a walkthrough at least once with the often obtuse puzzles and level design. I also found the force powers a bit tricky to manage. They all use the function keys by default, so it can be a bit awkward to hit them during combat. I especially recommend using the force power switch keys that allow you to scroll through your force powers with the selected one being activated by F, and binding them to something easy to access like additional mouse buttons if you have them. It makes it so much easier to use them during combat. Secondly, the AI can also use the force way faster than you can, switching between abilities much faster than you can rotate through, and generally being more fluid than you reaching up to hit your function keys. This is especially apparent in the boss battles since they can use like 3 different force powers in quick succession, but normal Reborn don't do it as much, and the slight advantage makes up for the AI's lack of human intelligence. Now on to some positives. Of course, the combat. I think one of the things which makes the combat in this game great is that it's a very unique style of lightsaber combat, one which I haven't really seen replicated outside this series. It's designed to make fights based more around movement and finding openings rather than precision strikes with your saber. You need to be constantly jumping and moving around your opponent in order to win a duel. Lightsaber mechanics toe the line between accessible and technical really well. First off, you have 3 different lightsaber styles at your disposal, and these amount to slow but high damage, medium damage and speed, and high speed with lower damage. These styles provide variation in how you fight while not changing up the way that combat itself works too drastically. They're basically like different movesets. On the more technical side is the ability to choose the way that you swing your saber based on your character's movement. For example, standing still with the heavy stance will make you bring your saber directly down on the enemy, while moving left or right will make you take sweeping strikes to their sides. This is definitely something that you don't need to master or even know to beat the game. I only found out about it while researching how lightsaber combat worked in the game. But it does add a good amount of depth, and I imagine that in the heyday of this game's multiplayer, this is what separated the wheat from the chaff. All of this results in combat which is crisp and energetic. There are a few things that I think the game could have done to improve upon the lightsaber combat though. One aspect that feels weird is blocking. You don't need to hold down any button to block, and you don't have any stamina. It's just done automatically. Because of this, it sometimes feels like you and your opponent are just bouncing off of each other, or that your blades are just passing through somebody without damaging them. This is especially visible in the multiplayer, where health seems to be a bit higher. It just seems a bit too random sometimes. The tutorial could have also better explained the lightsaber styles, well, at all, because with it only being pointed out in the menu and me taking the 4-month break during my playthrough, admittedly, I only realized that switching styles was a thing towards the end of the game. Now, I mentioned the multiplayer before, and this is probably as good a point as any to talk about it. While the server browser doesn't work anymore, you can still play against bots, and the game gives you a decent number of options to customize game rules. I personally turned force powers off when I played because I found the endless force lightning spam from the dark side team annoying. It's great that these types of options exist so that you can just jump into lightsaber combat really quickly and tailor the experience to how you want to play. There's also a mod that you can download to play against real people, and it seems like there are still people actually playing. Not a lot, but I've reviewed games in humble bundles with less players than this one, so it's honestly impressive that there's still a dedicated player base after all this time. Lastly, Jedi Outcast is home to one of the best cheats in gaming. If you ever play this game, I recommend that as soon as you get your lightsaber, open up your console by hitting Shift and tilde and type in "Help us Obi-Wan" to enable cheats, and then put in the big boy, G_Saber Realistic Combat 1. This cheat makes your lightsaber into a death stick. No, not that kind. With this cheat enabled, almost every hit with the lightsaber causes enemies to have their body parts dismembered. You don't even need to swing your saber. Simply walking into them with it will tear them apart. This cheat honestly should just be considered a different mode or difficulty level. It really changes the way you play. You can one-shot pretty much any enemy, which makes slashing through normal troopers insanely satisfying, just causing limbs and decapitated heads to fly everywhere. This also makes lightsaber duels play completely differently, as realistic lightsaber damage also applies to you. Both you and your opponent can kill each other with a single strike, so you have to play much more cautiously. And the added realism of any contact being able to make you lose a body part almost makes it into a Jedi simulator. It's just so much damn fun, and really fulfills that power fantasy we all have of being an unstoppable Jedi. Just like its protagonist, Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast is by no means perfect. It's mixed with both dark and light, good and bad elements. In the end, the issues I highlighted affect the experience to be sure, but not enough to make me tell you not to play the game. Jedi Outcast 2 does many things well, and is very much still worth playing to this day, even if only for its take on lightsaber combat alone. Even with the negatives, when you get past those first few hours, when the level design isn't making you alt-tab, and when you get in there and start fighting several squads of stormtroopers and slaying Reborn, it's just so much fun. I highly recommend this game, especially if you're a Star Wars fan. It certainly lives up to its reputation. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the review, remember to drop a like or subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments. I tried doing something new with this video with a bit of an extended plot summary, and I was wondering what you guys think about it. Was it useful or entertaining? Should I do sections like that more in future videos, or would a simpler plot overview be better? Your feedback is much appreciated. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.